Oftentimes we feel a debt collector has all the power, all the law, and everything's on his side. You know, we're not trying to evade our debt, but sometimes we find ourselves in financial hardships and we get where we just can't pay. Well, the law provides a way that protects us who really want to pay our debts and to protect us from the various illegal practices of debt collectors in the past. This particular video is actually the law itself that governs debt collectors. This is part of the Fair Credit Act, and the information in the Fair Credit Act is taken from this document that gives us certain rights. Well, the federal government has put various constraints and things on these debt collectors. Sometimes we just feel abused and misused, and that's exactly what they're doing. And they use all kind of unethical practices because they count on us not knowing, and we feel sometimes in such like we're in a horror movie. And I have experienced it growing up in a home where handling money and different things was not taught, and the concept of debt and what my rights were as a citizen were not explained to me as a young person. So as I matured, I found myself learning very hard lessons about the concept of debt. But the federal government has laws that govern debt collectors, and this video is the actual law. And I'm not going to read the whole thing. I'm just going to highlight certain sections that really address the debt collector's response to us as consumers. We do have the law on our side, and the FTC has prosecuted many of these unethical debt collectors who have done many horrible things in various organizations, and they have had to suffer the consequences. So we can find a way where we can be treated with dignity and work out our issues and get our debts resolved. This is the actual law. You can get this document off of the FTC's website. You can go to bulk orders. I've got the URL here, and it gives you the name of the PDF if you would like to have the actual document. It's called Fair Debt Collection Practices Act. This act does not apply to the consumer, but this particular act applies to those who want to be in the business of collecting debts. Remember what I'm saying. This does not apply to us as consumers. It applies to the actual debt collectors, whether it's an attorney or an organization or whoever it is. If they're in the business, excuse me, of collecting debt, they must abide by this law. Now on this particular screen, this is your table of contents for this law, and it gives you these sections here on your left starting at 801 down to 819. I have just highlighted a few that relate to us. 805 is communication and connection with debt collection. That's how they talk to us. And the next one is 806, which is abuse and harassment, things they cannot do, like calling you after certain times and all of this, calling you on your job and all of this. That's the section that covers that. And then the next one is false or misleading representation, like creating documents that pretend they're coming from a government agency or the police when they're not. And then unfair practices, that's covered on things they just cannot do. And then the concept of validating a debt, that's the most important part to me, because that was my beginning journey, learning how to force debt collectors to prove that the debt was mine. And as you can see, I've added like the page numbers that coincide with the video at the bottom of the page. So we're going to go through the pages, and then you'll be able to see where we are in relation to these particular topics and sections of the law. Now this is a short title. This is section 801, 802, Congressional Findings and Declarations of Purpose. This is 803. There's just various definitions you will find. And if you pay attention, you'll notice there's a number at the bottom of the page. That is the actual number in the law. And this is the continuation of definitions. And this section is a continuation of definition and moving to new section 804, acquisitions of location information. And here we come to communication in connection with debt collection. This is the first one that I pointed out in the table of contents on page 6. If you look at the bottom, I'm just going to highlight a little section here at the very top. It says, without prior consent of the consumer given directly to the debt collector or the express permission of the court of competent jurisdiction, a debt collector may not communicate with a consumer in connection with the collection of the debt. And then it lists these various items. But number one is really important. They cannot, it says, at any unusual time or place, like midnight or 12 o'clock. Here it lists, they cannot call you after 8 o'clock, and or before 9 a.m. So it gives you certain rights to control their behavior. And this is the law that they're supposed to abide by. These are the things that the Federal Trade Commission is prosecuting them with. When you see them in court, this is the law that they have violated. This section 806 really speaks to communication as well. This is harassment or abuse. They cannot physically harm you. They cannot do things that would harm your reputation. They're not permitted to harm your property. They cannot use foul or profane language, either in writing or verbally. This is section 807, false or misleading representation. A debt collector may not use any false, deceptive, or misleading representation or means in connection with the collection of any debt. So, and then they give you some examples. Number one, the false representation or implication that the debt collector is vouched for, bonded by, or affiliated with the United States or any state, including the use of any badge, uniform, or facsimile thereof. So they cannot pretend that they are the police or an attorney or other law enforcement agencies. They can't do that. And it goes on to give you some other things here in relationship to this concept of false or misleading representation. This is some more information in regards to section 807. It's very thorough. In number 11, it says the failure to disclose in the initial written communication with the consumer. And in addition, if the initial communication with the consumer is oral, in that initial oral communication, the debt collector is attempting to collect the debt, and that any information obtained will be used for that purpose. And the failure to disclose in subsequent communication that the communication is from a debt collector, except that this paragraph shall not be applied or found formal mispleading made in connection with a legal action. But as you can see, they have to tell you that they are a debt collector. This is section 808, unfair practices, and it states a debt collector may not use unfair or unconscionable means to collect or attempt to collect the debt. Number one lists the fact that they cannot collect a lot of excess fees or other incidentals without the authorization by the agreement creating the debt or permitted by law. And number two, it touches on the fact that the acceptance by a debt collector from a person of a check or other payment instrument post-dated more than 5 days, unless such person is notified in writing of the debt collector's intent to deposit such check or instrument not more than 10 nor less than 3 business days prior to such deposit. So if you give them a post-dated check, they cannot deposit it prior to, causing you problems with your bank account. 809 is validation of debt. This is how I found my way in the 90s. I had received a communication from a debt collector, and it wasn't an actual debt. It was just a computer printout, and it had me owing a debt in a city that I had never lived. And when I contacted these folks, they were not very polite. They were rude and insulting, and I literally was just devastated. I didn't know what to do. And so I was doing research online. I'm trying to figure out what can I do? What can I get to help me understand what my rights were? And I found the concept of debt validation, and I found the Fair Credit Act. So this particular section that constrains debt collectors is something that's, how could you say, very relevant to me. And it tells you here, it says within 5 days after the initial communication with the consumer in connection with the collection of any debt, a debt collector shall, unless following information is contained in the initial communication, or the consumer has paid the debt, send the consumer a written notice containing. Now, this is what's supposed to be in their letter when they notify you about a debt: the amount of the debt, the name of the creditor, and a statement that unless the consumer within 30 days after receipt of the notice disputes the validity of the debt or any portion thereof, the debt will be assumed to be valid by the debt collector. Now, number 4, a statement that if the consumer notifies the debt collector in writing within the 30-day period that the debt or any portion thereof is disputed, the debt collector will obtain verification of the debt or a copy of the judgment against the consumer. So they can't just send you a computer printout like they did me with no information about the creditor. It was very vague and no one would give me any answers. The debt validation concept is a profound thing that the federal government has provided to protect consumers from unscrupulous debt collectors. So here's some more information on that, and it talks about disputed debts, admission of liability. So this covers the information you need that you will find in the Fair Credit. This section is 810, multiple debts. This is section 811, legal actions by debt collectors, things that they can legally do. Section 812, I didn't include this on the index earlier as a highlight, but it's very important. It's a little short section, but furnishing certain deceptive forms. It is unlawful to design, compile, and furnish any form knowing that such form would be used to create the false belief in a consumer that a person other than the creditor of such consumer is participating in the collection of or in an attempt to collect a debt such consumer allegedly owes such creditors, when in fact such person is not so participating. So you have these people who will add like the furniture company and some other company on there, and that's illegal. They cannot do that. And in 813 is civil liabilities. This covers certain kinds of liabilities that the debt collector who fails to comply with in this provision, he can be penalized. This is continuing on the 813 civil liabilities. 814 is administrative enforcement. This is from the part the Federal Trade Commission plays, shall be authorized to enforce compliance with these subchapters. And then this is to continue on of section 814. And this is 815, reports to Congress by the Bureau, views of other federal agencies. So they have to submit information that says no later than 1 year after the effective date of this subchapter, and 1 year intervals thereafter. The Bureau shall make reports to Congress concerning administration of its functions under this subchapter. So these people are required to provide information to the federal government in regards to their activities. And 816 is relation to state laws, and 817 is exemption from certain state regulations, and 818 exemption from certain bad check enforcement programs operated by private entities. And this is continuing on with 818 and continuing on about checks. And this is now here at the bottom, it says 819, which is the effective date. It says this title takes effect upon the expiration of 6 months after the date of its enforcement, but section 809 shall apply only with respect to dates for which initial attempts to collect occurred after such effective dates. So there are timelines that they can deal with you on. So this is the last page, and this next to the last page in this document. This talks about the history of this particular legislation. It gives you the dates and things as the law was amended and changed. Thank you so much for visiting my channel, and I hope this will help you. If you know the law, it helps keep you from being abused by people who claim to be doing things according to the law. That sounds like a tongue twister, but it is so true. They will try to use the law you don't know to hurt you with the law. So it's very important. Print this out, the PDF, if you would like, or just use this online document. But once again, thank you for visiting my channel.